Hello, today I'm going to be looking at Web and Starship from West End Games, designed by Greg Kostakayan, who's obviously developed many good and innovative games. Earth Between Two Foes, the Terrans, and then there's two alien races that are competing. It's from 1984. Aliens look unique. Looks like it's well presented. It's a bookshelf kind of game. And the back provides a very good overview. Some background. Earth Between Two Foes. Two great civilizations faced each other across the Carina Arm. The Gwenthar, proud descendants of an aerial race, roam the stars in mighty quantum leap vessels. The Perrine, the children of burrowing animals, link their worlds together with the web. For decades, the two races bided their time in armed hostility, watching each other across the arm. Then came the radio signals from Terra. The war began in earnest. Interesting part of this is the two different races have different technologies. One is like a web, and the other has like faster than light ships. And the Terrans can do both of those apparently, so it should be interesting. Very asymmetrical. Moderate solitaire playability, 1 to 5 hours. 2 to 3 players, 3 scenarios, scale, 2 to 100 ships or 2 to 100,000 men per unit, 2 light years per movement point. So a lot of good summary there. Components, rulebook, looks like it's pretty detailed, a lot of detailed scenarios, some more theme background, which is nice. 24 pages. Some player aids. So part of this game is three-dimensional movement. You have X, Y, of course, on the plane, and then out-of-plane movement. This is places where the Perrine can send probes. Stars within 12 of Sol. And here's actually the distances between different locations. Places Gwenthar can settle on first turn. Gwenthar second turn from places originally owned and based first turn. The distances from those places. And then a probe record sheet. A lot of counters, and West End Games does, like I say, they always do a good job with components in my opinion. And they give you this tray, so it's got a nice tray with it. With a cover. 320 counters. Some are 3 colors, which is nice. Unique colors differentiating different races, and these are kind of event markers. A couple dice. I always like when they have unique dice with them. And this is the true distance indicator, designed by Greg Kostakayan. Development, Doug Kaufman, Greg Kostakayan. Graphic design, Larry Catalano. And I'll show the unique units. Here's the descriptors on them. It's always handy when they have these easy references in the books. So the green units are Gwenthar, the red are the Perrine, and the blue are the Terran. And each one has a undamaged and damaged side. So you have the maintenance cost, the transport value, combat strength. And they're divided between land and naval units. Sample Terran naval unit, maintenance cost, combat strength, carrying capacity, movement code. Sample Gwenthar naval unit, maintenance cost, carrying capacity, combat strength, jump range. Sample STB unit, maintenance cost, combat strength, transport value, special rule indicator. And where there's an asterisk, it indicates that it applies to special rules. So here's the unique counters. They're a little bit bigger than you often find in games. Instead of a half inch on the side, they're 5/8 by 5/8 inches, a little bit bigger. And some of these will have Similar counters for each of the 3 species, and some will just have less. And red is Perrine, green is Grenifar, and blue is Terran. So we have the Infantry Corps, Armor Corps, which of all 3, Drop Corps of just Grenifar and Terran, Engineer Units, Infantry Armored Cadre of all 3, then the STBs, and then of just Gwennifer and Terran, we have bases, heavy fleet, medium fleet, light fleet, transport fleet, web ships, and then we have some game kind of counter trackers, economic points remaining marker, economic point total markers, zeros and hundreds, maintenance levels. Then for just Terrans, we have the jump range, web distance, and general counters for game turn and war turn. All 3 have victory point spend markers. Terrans have diplomacy markers. All 3 have settlement markers of like 1 through 6. Different values at like 1 and 2. 2's on the other side here. Control markers of all 3. Web nexus markers for Perrine and Terran. Event chits, and there's a lot of variety of those. We'll talk about those in more detail. Perrine, Nexus Damage Destroyed marker, Terran Soul Strength Step Loss marker, and then economic values plus or minus 1 to 4 here. For all 3, we have supply dumps. Perrine, we have saboteurs, chemical warfare bombs, probe factories, and underground complex. And then to make planets habitable for this species, we have terraforming, and then of course gwenoforming and paraforming for the other species. For just Gwenofor, we have transport raider, planet buster bomb, elite troops, Terran, home defense militia, commerce raiders, Gwenofor fighters, and Terran technicians. During the course of the game, several events may happen, and that's represented by these event sheets. On one side is the event. Some are blank on the back side, but others have these events as described here. Accelerate military program. Player rolls 1 die. 1 or 2 is treated as a roll of 3. He receives any 1 unit whose maintenance value does not exceed the die roll without any construction cost. Takes effect during the unit construction and maintenance phase. Parent system. Choose played on any unsettled system. Instead of a player, roll die, and roll of 1 or 2. System's economic value is reduced by 1 point, 3 or 4 by 2 points, and 5 or 6 by 3 points. Government war. Reparting power. The player on whom the chiz played must declare war during the next mobilization phase. He may not agree to end the war during the war sequence. It can only be ended by the war end table. In addition, if he does not destroy at least 1 enemy unit or capture at least 1 system, he loses 1 victory point. Graft and corruption rife. Player's maintenance cost for this game turn increased by 20%. Run fractions to the nearest whole number. Failure to maintain a unit does reduce the modified maintenance cost by the unit's maintenance value plus 20%. Increased military spending. This turn the player receives 20% more economic points than his economic point total. Increased social spending. This turn the player receives 20% fewer economic points than his economic point total. Load system. Chiz played in any unsettled system or system in the process of being settled. Roll 1 die. Then roll of 1 or 2. The system's economic values increased by 1 point. Roll of 3 or 4 by 2 points. Roll of 5 or 6 by 3 points. Natives. A couple options here. May be played on any unsettled system. If a player begins settling the system, he does not place a settlement 1 marker there. Instead, the native level 1 to 2 is indicated on the event sheet is reduced by 1 when settlement is initiated. Any subsequent to the native level is reduced to an additional point until it reaches 0 on the next turn. The player places settlement 1 marker and continues settling the system normally. Off-map war. The player may not use units in his reserve during any war occurring this turn. Order from High Command. After the reassignment phase is completed, the player who plays this chit may reassign any one stack of units of the player on whom the chit is played according to the normal rules for reassignment. Preen Probe Disaster can only be played on the Preen player. He loses one probe currently in transit. Preen Free Probe can only be played on the Preen player during his next probe notation phase. He receives a probe at no cost. Prosperous middle class. This turn, the player's maintenance costs are reduced by 20%. Failing to maintain a unit reduces the player's maintenance by the value of the unit minus 20%. Reserves increase. The player on whom the chit is played must, during the reassignment phase, assign any 2 units from the game map to his reserves. May not be played on the Terran player. Settlement Enthusiasm. The settlement values of all systems the player is currently settling will increase by 2 points instead of the normal 1 point during the next settlement phase. This does not apply to systems the player begins settling during that phase. Settlement can still be forced, increasing settlement values by 3. Settlement Reluctance. The settlement values of all systems the player is currently settling will not increase during the next settlement phase. Settlement can still be forced, increasing settlement values by 1 instead of the normal 2 points. Terran Boom can only be played on the Terran player during the next Terran economic expansion segment. The Terran's economic point total increases by 10% instead of the normal 5%. Terran Bust can only be played on the Terran player during the next Terran economic expansion segment. Terran's economic point total does not increase. Terran Technological Breakthrough can only be played on the Terran player. Terran player may increase either his web distance or jump range, but not both, by 1 during his next technological development phase. Terran Technological Setback can only be played on the Terran player during his next technological development phase. The Terran player may not spend economic points to increase his web distance or jump range. Here's the game map. So it's 34 by 22 inches. It's like a poster kind of paper. You'll notice there's no hexes because you do the distance on the XY plane with the distance rangefinder. And it's 3-dimensional though, so it's meant to be fairly accurate within 50, so it's 56 light years across with Sol being at the center, and there's also XY, there's also a Z component. So the Z component or out of or into the ecliptic plane is shown by these minuses and plus values. The minuses are light blue, pluses are red in and out of the plane. And the size of the stars don't indicate the actual size of the stars. They indicate how close, how high up or how low they are. So the more plus they are out of the plane, the bigger they are, and the more minus, the smaller. So the several systems have multiple stars, but it's only the multiple stars are considered to be in the same location for game purposes. Star Spectra class has no effect in play, is just provided for informational purposes. Astronomically, stars are divided into supergiants, giants, subgiants, and main sequence stars, and white dwarfs. There are no stars in the first 3 classes. All stars in the map are either main sequence stars or white dwarfs. Print a triangle next to each star system. These range from 0 to 6, except Sol's number is 20. This number is the system's economic value. Some stars have ownership boxes next to them, so the stars begin under the control of one or another player. Stars with the green box are initially owned by the Gwynfar player. Those are the red box. By the Perrine player. Those are the blue box by the Terran player. Other stars are initially unowned. So tracks used in the course of the game, printed on the game map. These tracks include the economic point totals and economic point remaining tracks, maintenance level tracks for each of the 3 players, turn record track, victory points lost, victory points spent track, and the Terran diplomacy track, and the Terran technology track. And then there's reserve boxes for the Gwynfar and Perrine player. Some symbol stars printed next to stars. For each Supreme Star and Soul, each begins with a web nexus, shown here. Soul has an intrinsic defense strength of 3. LTF 1747 and Gamma before us are staging areas for the Gonif player. Zero Sinus Major, Shara, and Wolf 49 are staging areas for the Preen. The staging area symbol is printed next to each. Like here, for instance. See the Celestial Key shown here. It says what they are. And there's and then most of the charts and tables required for play, including the true distance table, economic point, cost chart, naval and land combat results table, and the war end table. So that's the components, and we'll get into rules. Going through rules. First of all, the true distance measure. You use this rangefinder to get the distance in between the different systems, and then you look at the height difference between the two, and you consult the true distance table, which uses the Pythagorean theorem. It's true, three-dimensional distance. And then movement points. Each movement point represents 2 light years. Lines of communication. Player may only settle a system if he can trace line of communication to it. Each player traces the line a different way. The Preen player is line of communication. The other is connected to a system he owns by a web link. The Gwenifar player has a line of communication to a system if it is within 10 movement points of the Gwenifar base. The Terran player's line of communication to a system that is connected to a Terran-owned system by a web link, or if it is within his jump range of a Terran base. Webs, Supreme player may not move via faster than light jumps. Uses the web. The Terran player can use webs and faster than light. Each Preen system begins connected to every other Preen system via web. Each system is considered to contain a web nexus. Soul also contains a web nexus. During the course of the game, a player may place additional web nexi on initially unsolved systems, such nexi are represented by nexus markers. A player's units may move from one system to another if both contain friendly web nexi, and there's a chance systems contain nexi between the two, each system being no further from the next than the player's web distance of initially 2, being increased during the game. Movement is possible between 2 systems. Those systems are said to be web-linked, faster than light jumps. The Gwenifar player may only move via FTL jumps. The Terran player may use both FTL and webs. The naval unit may move between 2 systems if the distance between the two is less than or equal to the unit's jump range. Gwenifar jump ranges run from 12 for light fleets to 8 for heavy fleets. The jump range of Terran units is determined by the current position of the Terran jump range marker on a Terran technology track. At the beginning of the game, the marker occupies the 5 box. Economic value, system's economic value is printed next to it in the yellow game map. This is the number of economic points the system can contribute to a player's economy if fully settled. Settlement value. Settlement value of the system is either equal to the system's economic value if fully settled, or some number less than that value. When a player begins settling a previously unsettled system, its settlement value becomes 1, and the player's total economic value is increased by 1. During each subsequent settlement phase, the settlement value increases by 1 until it equals the system's economic value, which is then fully settled. Economic points. Players spend economic points to build and maintain units, to initiate settlement, and so on. Each turn, the player receives as many economic points as his economic point total. This total is equal to the settlement values of the systems he controls, plus, in the case of the Gwenifar and Preen players, some number of points contributed from the player's central government, or in the case of the Terran player, some number of points resulting from Terran economic expansion. Ownership. Beginning of the game, a player owns all the systems next to which a square containing the first letter of a side's name is printed. A player owns any system he settles in the course of the game, unless it is conquered by another player in the course of a war. A player conquers an enemy system if, at the end of any combat phase during a war, he has land units there, and the enemy player does not. The conquered system remains owned by the conquering player until all of his land units in the system are eliminated. If a system is owned by one player, but was originally settled by another, the owning player must garrison the system with a land unit in order to retain control of the system. If at any time he fails to garrison it, the system reverts to the control of the original settler. Special rule applies to zero economic value systems. Since these cannot be settled, the player gains ownership of the system by building a base or web nexus there, and retains ownership until his base or web nexus is destroyed. It is perfectly possible for a system to be settled by, for instance, the Preen, but owned by the Gwynfar, although the Gwynfar would have to garrison the system. The system is controlled by and pay taxes to the Gwynfar. When a player owns a system settled by another player, the settling player's settlement or control marker remains in the system to indicate who is the original settler. Ownership of the system is indicated by the presence of a garrisoning unit. Sequence of play consists of 14 game turns. So at the end of each game turn, players announce that they're going to be mobilizing. If they mobilize, then a war starts. And then you do the war sequence until that's completed. Then you go back to the regular game turns. So here's the game turn sequence. Event chit phase. Each player draws one event chit from the event chit economic development phase. Income determination segment. Each turn economic expansion segment. Probe arrival phase. Settlement phase. Preen settlement segment. Train settlement segment. Gwynfar settlement segment, unit construction and maintenance phase, Terran technological development phase, the Preen probe notation phase, Preen unit reassignment phase, Gwynfar segment, Preen segment, Terran segment for 2-player games only, diplomatic phase, and then the mobilization phase, and then you advance to game turn marker. No, in 2-player games there's no Terran player. Instead, one player makes decisions for the Terrans. Position of the marker of the Terran diplomacy track determines which player does so at any particular game turn. War sequence. Beginning of a war, the players must determine the alliance structure. Initiative phase. First player turn. Movement phase. First supply phase. The combat phase. And then combat segment. Withdrawal segment. Engineering phase. Web destruction segment. Repair segment. Emergency reinforcement phase. Second player turn. Second player takes actions as described in the sequence above. Neutral player turn. Movement phase. The neutral player, if any, may move his units. Supply phase. The neutral player determines which of his units are out of supply. Each out of supply unit loses 1 step. Engineering phase. The neutral player may emplace stockpiled Nexi. War on determination. The players may end the war by mutual agreement at any time. In addition, the players must roll on the war end table each war turn to determine whether the governments force an end to the war. If the war does not end, the players begin another war turn. So the event chit, the player may never have more than 1. During each event chit phase, the player draws 1 from the event chit cup. So in a turn you can actually use 2 chits. If you have 1 unplayed, you can use that. And then the other one, you can play that if you play it immediately. You can't share them, can't trade them, and it takes effect immediately. And it's only done during the regular game turn, not the war turn phase. And you can do them any time during the game turn. So each player has tracks to account for the economic point total track, economic points remaining, and the maintenance level track and the settlement. The initial Terran economic point total represents the economic value of the system with which Terra begins the game. So the other player's initial totals represent total economic value of systems on the map which players own initially, plus some portion of the total economic value of the rest of the player's empires. During the settlement phase, the players may begin settlement of new systems. To begin settling a system, the player must be able to trace line of communication between the system and the system he owns. During the settlement phase, each player in turn may declare what new systems he is beginning to settle. The Preen player declares first, then the Terran player, then the Gwynfar player. Given system can only be settled by one player at a time. Thus, settling a system, the player must be able to trace the line of communications to the system, declare that he's doing so, and expend 3 economic points to initiate the settlement. Exception. Of course, the game, the player establishes new web links by sending sublight probes to new systems of the game map. On a game turn that a probe arrives at a previously unsettled system, the player automatically initiates settlement of that system. He need not spend 3 economic points to do so. When a player initiates settlement, places one of his settlement 1 markers on the system where settlement is occurring. Each system has an economic value. Sol has a value of 30. All the systems have values ranging from 0 to 6. No player may ever settle a system with economic value of 0, although web next time bases can be constructed to such systems. The system's economic value is the number of points it can contribute to a player's economic point total. When a player begins to settle a system, he places a settlement 1 marker there. On each subsequent settlement phase, the player removes settlement marker of the system and replaces it with settlement marker with a value of 1 point higher, and the player places a control marker there. A player only expends economic points to initiate a settlement. In subsequent turns, his settlement value increases automatically. Each player has a limited number of settlement markers. The number of markers a player has is the restriction on the number of systems he may settle. Note the number of control markers is not intended to restrict players. If a player owns an enemy settled system, its settlement value never increases. Only systems owned by a settling player increase in settlement value. Forcing settlement. The pre-and players only may increase the rate at which a system is settled by forcing settlement. They may only force settlement of systems containing friendly web nexi. Forcing settlement at a system costs 3 economic points each turn the player forces settlement there. When settlement is forced, its settlement value increases by 2 points instead of the normal 1 point. The player may not force settlement at a system when he initiates settlement there, only on subsequent turns. Terran economic expansion. During the Terran economic expansion segment of the economic development phase, the Terran economic point total increases by 5%. Terra's economic point total increases by a minimum of 1 point. Unit construction and maintenance. Player does not expend economic points to maintain units in his reserve. Maintenance costs are paid before any new units are constructed, so player need not maintain a unit until he builds it. If a player has insufficient economic points to maintain all his units, he must disband some units. The player may also voluntarily disband units during the unit construction and maintenance phase, even an exception. A player may never disband units in his reserves. A player with a medium or heavy fleet may partially maintain that unit by paying instead the maintenance cost required for a smaller fleet. In this case, the medium or heavy fleet is removed and replaced by a lighter medium fleet. Unit construction. After all maintenance costs are paid, players may construct new units. The countermix is a limitation on the players. Players construct units simultaneously. However, players do not place newly constructed units in the game map until the end of the phase. Building a unit costs 3 times as many economic points as the unit's maintenance cost. The player may build units in any system he owns, which contains a preen web nexus. A player may build units at any system where he has a base. The Terran player may build units at Sol or systems containing Terran web nexi, and also systems containing Terran bases. A player who already owns a light or medium fleet can upgrade to a medium or heavy fleet. He pays the difference. Only fleets currently at bases or systems containing web nexi can be upgraded. The Quinifar and Terran players may also construct bases during the unit construction and maintenance phase. A player may construct a base at a system he owns, to which he can trace a line of communication. A player can also construct a base at a system with economic value 0 if he can trace a line of communication there. A player may not construct units at a base on the same turn they build the base. Web ship units are hybrid units which permit both web and FTL movement. The player may never build web ships. The Terran player may build web ships at any time. The Quinifar player may only build web ships with the cooperation of one of the other 2 players. Web nexi can also be constructed. The Terran player may construct a web nexus in the system if the distance between the system and any one Terran system is equal to less than Terran player's web link distance and also equal to or less than his jump range. Constructing a web nexus costs 5 economic points. This does mean that Nexus can be built on unsettled systems which meets the above criteria. However, they can never be built in systems owned by other players. Except both Terran and Marine players can stockpile web nexi for use during the web sequence. If during the unit construction and maintenance phase the player has stockpiled Nexus, he may automatically emplace it in his own system as if he had built the Nexus during that phase. The Marine player may only build sublight probes during the unit construction maintenance phase unless he cooperates with another player. The Marine player must use sublight probes to establish web links. When the probe reaches its destination, a Marine web nexus is placed at the destination system and settlement is automatically initiated there if possible. Building a sublight probe costs 8 economic points. Any two players may cooperate in the construction of a web nexus. A Marine player may not give a nexus to the Terran player if the nexus is the only one of a pre-known system. Either stockpiled or placed nexus can be transferred. If during the mobilization phase, web nexus owned by one player is located in the system owned by another, the owning player of the system may announce that he is destroying the web nexus. When this happens, the nexus marker is removed. Web nexi can only be removed at the end of wars. The owning player of the nexus always has the option to declare war before the nexus is removed. The Gwynethar player can never own web nexi, although Terran and Marine web nexi can be built at Gwynethar planets with the Gwynethar Corporation. The number of web nexus markers is not intended to limit the players. Terran technological development suites both technologies, but they're at lower levels than the others. Web distance. The Marine player has web distance of 12. The Terran player begins with a web distance of 2. He can only establish nexi systems no more than 2 movement points from Sol, or from another system containing a Terran nexus. During each Terran technological development phase, the Terran player may increase his web distance by 1 at a cost of 3 economic points. He may not increase his web distance by more than 1 point per turn, with the exception of the Terran technological breakthrough. The Terran player may never increase his web distance above 15. FTL jump range. Gwynethar player has a jump range of 10. Gwynethar FTL naval units must remain within 10 movement points of friendly bases. Terra begins with a jump range of 5. During each Terran technological development phase, the Terran player may increase his jump range by 1 at a cost of 4 economic points. The Terran jump range may never increase above 15. Marine probes. During the Marine probe arrival phase, the Marine player determines whether any probes reach their destinations. During his probe notation phase, he chooses destinations for probes he built during the current game turn. Probe notation. The record sheets are used to record the origins and destination of the Marine probe. Probes move at a rate of 2 movement points per turn. The Marine player should take the number of movement points between the destination and ordnance system and have the number and note the final total in the game turn of arrival column. The Marine player should keep his probe record sheet secret from the other players at all times. Probe arrival. During the Marine arrival phase, the Marine player must determine whether any of his probes arrive at their destinations on the current turn. If a probe arrives at its destination, web nexus is immediately placed in the destination system. The Marine player may place a nexus in Terran or Gwynethar systems during probe arrival phases. If a system where a probe arrives is unknown, the Marine player may also place a settlement 1 marker in the system. If a probe arrives at a Terran or Gwynethar system, which contains a fleeter base, that fleeter base may attempt to prevent the establishment of nexus of the system. If the die roll is less than or equal to the unit's combat strength, the probe is destroyed and no nexus is placed. A pre-nexus placed at a Terran or Gwynethar system can automatically be removed by the system's owner during the mobilization phase, unless the Marine player declares war. Unit reassignment. During the unit reassignment phase, each player may move his units among systems he owns. During unit reassignment, each player may move any or all of his units. Each unit may move an infinite distance as long as it ends its movement in a system to which its owning player can trace line of communication. It ends its movement in a system owned by a moving player. Players may only move units to other players' systems during wars. Note Sol is considered to contain intrinsic web nexus, which can never be damaged or destroyed, and which can only be used by a Terran player. Any system containing a Terran nexus is considered linked by web to Sol, if Sol is within web distance of the system. The Marine and Gwynethar players may withdraw any units to their respective reserves during unit reassignment. The unit is in the reserve box. It remains there until the war is declared. War rules. Mobilization. During the mobilization phase, any player may announce that he is declaring war against another player. If any Preen probe webbed in a Gwynfor Terran system this turn, Preen player has the option to declare war first. Otherwise, the players must announce whether they are declaring war in this order. Gwynfor Preen Terran. A player may declare war against any single or opposing players. If a neutral player remains neutral, he takes no part in the ensuing war, except that he may announce intervention on either side during an initiative phase of war, but neither warring player may declare war against him. Once war is declared, the normal game turn sequence is suspended, and the players begin the first war turn. If no war is declared, two things may occur during the mobilization phase. A player who owns a system where another player has a nexus may destroy that nexus. Players may, if they wish, exchange or give systems to each other. When systems are exchanged, the granting player may immediately reassign units from the system he is giving away. The receiving player may now reassign any one unit to the system. Initiative and sequencing. Although alliances can change between wars, they cannot change during a war. War is fought in a sequence of war turns. Each of the players play repeated war turns until war is ended. If two players are allied, they both take actions together in the same player turn. If one player is neutral, each war turn contains a third player turn. A neutral player's player turn consists solely of a movement phase, a supply phase, and engineering phase. On the first war turn of a war, the player who declared war may choose whether to take the first or second player turn. On subsequent war turns, one player from each side rolls die. Movement generals. During his movement phase, a player may move any or all of his units. Units are always moved from system to system. During movement phase, only the phasing player can move their units. If during war one player is neutral, he moves his units during the third player turn. Web movement. Only land units, including SDVs, may move via the web. Naval units may not. A unit may use web movement if it begins the movement phase in a system which contains an undamaged web nexus by the moving player or his ally. It may move to any system connected to its starting system by a web network. It is possible for a player to have two disconnected web networks. A unit moving by web movement may move from any system in a network to any other system in a network. If the Terran and Preen players are allied, their web networks may be integrated into a single network. Note that it is possible for networks to be broken if nexi are damaged or captured during a war, or reunited if Gwynfor land units can be moved by web if allied with the Terran or Preen players. Web ships act like mobile web nexi. A unit can move from a system containing a web nexus to one where a friendly and damaged web ship is located, vice versa, even if no web nexus exists. If that system, as long as the web ship is within the player's web distance, web ships themselves can only use FTL movement. Units can web move through a web ship both before and after the web ship itself moves. A unit may not web move and be transported by transport unit in the same movement phase. SDB, System Defense Battery Units. Units may not be moved by web or by transport to a system which contains enemy land units unless the system also contained friendly land units beginning of the movement phase. SDB units are considered to be land units for movement purposes, but naval units for combat purposes. FTL movement. Only naval units may use FTL movement. Land units may do so only if carried by transports. Each naval unit has jump range. The jump range of a Gwynfor unit is printed on its counter. The regular game rooms refer to the Gwynfor jump range as being equal to 10. The jump range, defined is referred to as commercial jump range. In war rules, when the term jump range is used alone, it refers to the jump range printed on the unit's counter. Each Terran unit has a movement code printed on its counter. This movement code is one of three letters: H for heavy, M for medium, or L for light. The jump range for all M units is equal to the commercial jump range. Jump range for L units is equal to the commercial range plus 2. The jump range for H units is equal to the commercial range minus 2. Either or both of the systems between which unit moves may contain enemy units. Transports. Both the Terran and Gwynfor players possess a number of transport units. Each transport unit heavy fleet has carrying capacity. Each land unit has a transport value. A transport or heavy fleet, which begins its movement in a system which contains friendly land units, may load those units. A transport, and the unit carries may move on the same turn in which it loads land units. If a transport or heavy fleet ends its movement in a system which does not contain any enemy or STB units, it may unload any land units it's carrying there. Land units cannot be unloaded in systems containing enemy, naval, or STB units, although they can be unloaded in systems which contain solely enemy land units. Some exceptions. Drop cores can always be unloaded during the movement phase. If a transport ends its movement in a system which does not contain enemy, naval, or STB units, but those units are destroyed or withdrawn during the ensuing combat phase, the transport's land units may then be unloaded prior to the resolution of land combat. STB units loaded on transports may not fire during naval combat. Supply. During the supply phase, the phasing player must determine which units are in supply and which are not. Any unit which is not in supply immediately loses one step. A unit is in supply via web if it is in a system containing a friendly undamaged web nexus, which is connected via web network to at least one friendly system, which does not contain enemy land units. Supply cannot be drawn from a damaged nexi. A naval unit is supplied via FTL resupply if the system it occupies is within the owning player's conventional jump range, when it is on damaged bases, or within an ally's commercial jump range of an undamaged allied base. Land unit is in supply via FTL resupply as above, but only if there are no enemy naval or STB units in the land unit system, or the player has naval superiority in the system. A player has naval superiority if the combined combat strength of his naval and STB units is greater than or equal to the combined strength of any naval and STB units in the system. Drop cores can be supplied via FTL resupply even if owning player does not have naval superiority in the system. Only undamaged bases can provide FTL resupply. Either method of supply can be used to provide supply to both land and naval units. Combat. Whenever combat occurs, there are two types of combat: naval combat and land combat. Naval combat occurs only among naval units, STB units, and bases. Land combat only among land units. This combat must occur in every system where both sides have naval units, STB units, and or bases. Combat among land units is never required, but can occur in any system where both sides have land units. Combat in one system is completely resolved before combat in another system is resolved. Within a system, naval combat resolved first, before land combat. Naval combat. At the end of each round, each side has the option to withdraw its naval or STB units from the system. The players continue to resolve rounds of naval combat until one side is destroyed or withdraws. Land units are never affected by naval combat in any way. In each round, each side totals the combat strength of the naval base and STB units it has in the system. The player finds his side's total combat strength along the top of the naval combat results table. He rolls one die. He reads across the table to determine. The result is to form a number. This is the number of total steps of units the opposing player must lose. Once one side's fire is resolved, the other side's units resolve their fire. Fire is considered simultaneous. Each unit can lose some number of steps before being eliminated. Transport fleets can suffer 2 steps of loss. Bases, light fleets, web ships, and STB units can also suffer 2 steps. Medium fleets can suffer 4 steps, and heavy fleets 6. When a heavy fleet suffers 1 step loss, flip to its damage size. Additional, it's replaced with a medium, which is flipped, and then a medium is replaced to a light, which is flipped. When a player suffers step losses, he chooses which units will absorb those losses. He may apply them to a single unit or spread them across several. If there are counters unavailable, for instance, from a heavy to medium, then the unit is destroyed. Transport fleet cannot be used to satisfy combat losses unless there are no other naval, base, or STB units in the system. If floated transport or heavy fleet suffers losses, and after doing so its transport value is less than the total transport value carries, the excess land units must be eliminated. After each round of combat, either player may choose to withdraw some or all of his naval or STB units from the system. STB units may only draw by web movement transport, and naval units by FTL movement. If a drawing force contains heavy fleets of transports, it may load land units in the system from which is drawing land combat consists of only 1 round. STB units are treated like land units for movement purposes. They engage in naval combat only. When land combat occurs in a system, each side totals the common strengths of land units. Did not include the strengths of land units, civil and transports, total combat strength of the phasing players compared to the total strength of the non-phasing. The ratio is then used in the combat results table. The players cross-reference the roll on the die roll on the table. You'll find two numbers separated by a slash. The first number is the number of steps lost by the land units of the phasing. Second is the steps lost by the non-phasing. The attacker has naval superiority in a system where land combat takes place. Shift one column to the right along land combat results table. If the defender has naval superiority, shift one column to the left. Drop corps units can suffer 2 steps of loss. Engineering units also have 2 steps. Infantry and armor corps can suffer 3 steps of losses. When such units with steps flipped or damage, infantry or corps suffers a second, its counter is replaced with a cadre counter. Upon suffering a third, the unit is removed from play. If all the players' cadre counters are in use, the unit is eliminated. STP units in a system containing enemy land units but no friendly land units are automatically eliminated. Soul's intrinsic strength for land combat is 3. When land combat occurs in Soul, combat strength may be added to the strength of other Terran land units there. Soul's intrinsic defense can suffer 3 steps before being eliminated. Soul strength is eliminated. Soul strength is immediately restored to 3 at any time there are no enemy land units in Soul. Soul's intrinsic strength can only fight for the Terran player. Note that Soul cannot be conquered until the internal defense is 0. Capturing systems. At the end of the combat phase, if one side has any land units in an enemy system and no enemy land units are present, the system is captured. Is engineering repair of bases. If after a round of naval combat, a player has a damaged base and engineering unit in the same system, the engineer may immediately attempt to repair the base and roll of 1 through 3 for undamaged engineers or 1 through 2 for damaged ones. The base is repaired and flipped to its undamaged side. Other rolls have no effect. Only Terran Gwynfor engineers can repair bases. Engineer may attempt to repair base every naval combat round. If during a player's engineering phase he has a damaged base of a system containing a friendly engineer, his engineer may attempt to repair the base. Repair of web nexi. During the engineering phase, engineering units of the phasing players may attempt to repair damaged web nexi only Terran, and pre-engineers may attempt to do so. The intrinsic soul nexus cannot be damaged. If during the web destruction segment of the engineering phase, a player has a web nexus system containing enemy land units and does not contain any friendly units, the enemy player's options may destroy the web nexus. If a Terran or pre-engineer is at a system containing damaged web nexus during the phasing player's repair segment and there are no enemy units, the nexus is automatically repaired. If there are any enemy units in the system, roll die and roll of 1 through 3 for damaged engineers or 1 through 2 for damage. The web nexus is repaired. A damaged web nexus cannot be used for web movement or supply. If a Marine or Terran player has captured an enemy system which contains a damaged enemy web nexus, the engineers may attempt to repair the nexus. The nexus is repaired and replaced with an undamaged nexus of the capturing player. Stockpile nexes are moved as if they were land units. They have transport values of 1. During a friendly repair segment, Terran Marine engineers may attempt to emplace stockpile nexes. Stockpile nexes is successfully emplaced with a roll of 1 through 3. If engineers are damaged, 1 or 2 if damaged. During the movement phase of the player turn, the player may move any or all of his reserves on the game map. Reserves may be entered in any of the player's staging area systems. In order for a reserve to enter the map system, which otherwise must be owned by the player who owns the unit and may not be moved again until the following war turn's friendly movement phase. Each time a player enters a unit from his reserves, he loses 1 victory point. Each player must keep a running total number of reserve units interested in a war. At the end of the war, he must reassign at least 1/2 number of units run up from the map to his reserve box. They do not have to be the same units. If the player does not have at least this number of units, he must remove all his units to the reserve box. So in the emergency reinforcement phase of the player turn, the The Gwenfar Marine can ask for central government reinforcements, and then that would cost them 2 victory points. They roll a die, 1 die, and they can get that many units that they roll or less. And they put those in the reinforcements, and then when they bring them in the next turn, they still pay the 1 victory point cost for each unit. And then there's also a event chit of off-world war, which means that those 2 races the governments are busy, so they can't bring the reinforcements in, but they can still call for the emergency ones and put them in the reserve. They just can't bring them in play yet. So the war can end by a mutual agreement, and players can cede planets to them to come to some kind of war end agreement, or the war end table is consulted. Basically, if you roll a 12 on 2 die with modifications, the war is ended. And the roll is increased by 1 for each war term which has been fought. The player may reduce the chance of any war by spending victory points. Each victory point spent by a player reduces the roll of 1 by 1. The player may increase the chance in the end of war by offering to cede systems to opponents, outlined below. That was increased by as many points as the current settlement value of systems the player offers to cede. The player may offer to cede any of the systems. In total, their current settlement values. The war tail is increased by its number. At the end of the war is declared, those systems are immediately captured by a player's opponent. The capturing player must move land units to cede systems to garrison them. The player may offer to cede a system to his opponents. If the system is within the web distance or commercial jump range, whichever is greater. Effective war's end. So determine who controls what. In alliances, you have to figure out between the 2 players whether there's a question who owns what between the alliance. Players now determine what happens to their damaged units. Heavy or medium fleets, which are reduced to undamaged. Medium light fleets remain as they are. Each player should count the number of damaged units. See as the board. Player may return half of the damaged units to undamaged status. The remaining damaged units are removed from play, except the remaining damaged medium or heavy fleet is reduced to undamaged light or medium fleet. The player may choose which units are repaired and which are removed from play. Damaged bases and web nexi are automatically repaired at the end of the war. Once this is done, the player should determine which of their units are returned to their reserves. If any peering system serves the original sublight probe is held by an enemy player at the end of the war, there's no other peering system within 12 movement points so that destination probe is destroyed. Finally, players should conduct a special unit reassignment phase. During this phase, each player must move his units so that each into the system owned by the moving player. The normal rules for unit reassignment do apply, except that any unit currently out of play may move to any legal destination as per the assignment rules. Once the unit reassignment is finished, the players advance to game turn marker and begin the next game turn. As a result of cessation of systems, a player may wind up and control the system with the ability to move a land unit to the system to garrison it. In this case, he retains control of the system automatically for the next game turn. During that game turn, he must rectify the situation if he is able. When a Gwenfar or Terran system is ceded to the Preen, and there is no web nexus in the system, the Gwenfar Terran player is required to cooperate with the Preen construction of a web nexus of the system, their next unit construction and maintenance phase. Elimination of player. If all players' systems are conquered, course of war, player is eliminated. With the exception of the Terran Underground. Terran Underground, so it's conquered. The economic point total of the Terran players is reduced by 20, and the conquering player gains 20. If the Terran player cannot build units, he has no web nexus air bases. He may build bases at any owned systems and build units in systems where he builds bases. The same term, which is base, is constructed if he wishes. He does receive economic points for the systems he does control. In addition, the Terran player receives income from the Terran Underground. During each income determination phase, he rolls 3 dice. Total rolls he's deducted from the economic points remaining of the self-following player and add to the Terran Underground pool. Terran player cannot spend economic points from the Underground pool until war is declared. The Underground pool is the running total of income received from Terran Underground and is accumulated from game turn to game turn. If If a Terran player owns no systems, he can normally build units. Each turn, he rolls 2 dice. The total roll is deducted from the economic points remaining with the Terran Conqueror. Add to the Terran Underground. Any economic points the Terran player receives from this economic point total are also added to the Underground pool. Economic expansion points are spent to build units if the Terran player retains systems, but are added to the Underground pool if none are owned. When a war is declared, the Terran player may, in his option, announce a revolt. When he does so, he spend points from his Underground pool. During the first initiative phase of the war, he may spend any or all of the cumulative points constructed units, spending normal amount for each unit. All constructed units appear at Sol, despite the fact that it's not even owned. Terran players automatically at war with the occupier of Sol. When the revolt is announced, the Terran player immediately regains control of Sol's intrinsic land combat strength 3 and its intrinsic web nexus. If revolt does not result in the reconquest of Sol, the Terran Underground may continue accumulating economic points, and any points not spent during one revolt are retained. If revolt results in the liberation of Sol, any unspent economic points are lost. In game scenarios, so there's the first one that just between the Terran and Guinevere and goes 4 turns. Then there's a war scenario that just has the war segment. Then there's the grand scenario, which I'll be doing a few turns of, which has basically the full game. And special units, these are optional rules you can do. Special units can do supply dump, chemical warfare bomb, saboteur, paraforming engineers, probe factory. Guinevere has special units, so it's supply dump, transport raider, Guinevere fighters. I won't talk about these in detail, but letting you know that they exist. Planet busters, elite troops, Terran special units, supply dump, terraforming engineers, home defense militia, commerce raiders, technicians. Basically, any system that has a supply dump is automatically a supply. Then 2-player game is basically the Guinevere and Preen, and then the Terran isn't in that game, but you move the diplomacy marker depending on which the Guinevere Preen the Terran is. Say move basically the Terran diplomacy towards Guinevere Preen depending on who they're effectively aligned with, and that player controls them. Some more background information, a lot of great detail there. We'll get into setup and play. Setup then for the grand scenario. First of all, Terrans begin with a base and medium fleet at Sol. Started with an economic point total of 30, maintenance level of 10, and the initial jump range is 5, shown here, and the web distance is 2. I'll set up. So I'm doing the 3-player version. The Preen sets up with the following units: 1 engineer, 3 infantry corps, 1 armor corps, and 3 SDB. And any Preen systems or combination systems, I set them up on Zybudis, Beta Kanai, Shara, and the Flying Star. Distribute them there. In the reserve box, they start with a engineer, infantry corps, 2 armor corps, and 2 STBs. In their economic point total track, start with 50, maintenance level of 34. Then the Preen probe record sheet. First of all, you have to do probes that are within 12 movement points before you're at, so that limits to where I can go. I'm going to be going from Zybudis to BD33, Zybudis to CD-20, Zybudis to Alpha Centauri, and then Wolf 489 will go to 61 Virginis. For instance, looking at Zybudis to BD plus 33, look at the range, and it would be 6. In the XY, the height distance is 8 minus 4, which is 4. So it's 6 and 4 with the Pythagorean theorem. Then looking at the true distance table in that matrix, you get 7. So, and similarly for the others. we ended up with a distance of 7, 8, 11, and 6. In the scenario, you're allowed 20 movement points because they are already in flight, basically, and you apply them to how far along you want them to be. So I applied 5 movement points to B33, 6 to CD minus 20, 5 to Alpha Centauri, and 4 for 61 Virginis. And if you look at the delta then of those, it'd be 2 movement points remaining for BD33, 2 remaining for CD, 6 for Alpha Centauri, and 2 for 61 Virginis. And they move 2 movement points per turn, so this would, counting from time 0, so by the beginning of turn 1, they'll be at, just divide that by 2, so the 2 movement points you'll get there in turn 1, 6 movement points you get there in turn 3, 2 movement points you get there in turn 1. The Gwenfar begins with 1 base at LFT 1747, 1 base at Gamma Provanus, 1 drop corps, 1 infantry corps, 1 transport fleet, 1 heavy fleet, and 1 light fleet at any Gwenfar system or combination. I kind of set them up in this grouping here at LFT, 1747 going to Provanus. I got the bases, and then I have the units on Beta Hydra and Delta Provanus. Gwenfar player starts with a economic point total of 45 and a maintenance level of 31. For the victory points then, each player determines how many victory points he earns. Each player's victory point total is equal to his economic points at the time, minus any victory points spent for taking units from reserves, requesting emergency reinforcements, and modifying war and table die rolls. Once you do that victory point, you go to your victory level this is the victory points for the different levels. You compare the levels, and then by looking at the differences of these levels, you go to the determination chart. So you have levels 0 through 4. Player with the smallest level loses. 2 players tied for smallest level both lose. 3 players tied, draw among all 3. Players tied for highest level, draw between the 2. Players intermediate, between smallest and largest, marginal victory. Players 1 level more than nearest competitor, substantial victory. 2 levels more, decisive. 3 levels more than nearest, fantastic victory. 4 levels more than nearest, it's your manifest destiny to rule the galaxy. So we're on turn 3 here. I'll do a couple turns. First event shit phase. They each draw 1 from here. This time I get, for Preen, gets Accelerate Military Program. Roll 1 die. Sees any 1 unit whose maintenance value does not exceed the die roll. So 4, he'll choose an infantry, which has got 4. He'll place that infantry in his settled system, CD minus 20. So that's good. Let's see what Terran gets. They don't get anything. We'll see what Gwenfar get. Increase social spending. This turn, they're discussed in detail here. This turn the player receives 20% fewer economic points than his economic point total. Income determination segment. So I've been keeping it up to date as I develop settled systems. Preen has colonized and got a couple settlements here, so they have 3 systems where they have a settlement of 2 value in addition to what they had previously. So they increase their points 6 from where they were initially. Gwenfar has colonized and settled a system here with a settled 1, but they also get an economic value of 1 because they got a load system there. So they've increased it by 2. And I've been keeping the Terrans updated as well. They've settled Alpha Centauri and put 1 settlement there, and also they did their economic expansion last time, so they got up to 22. And now we do the Terran economic expansion, and they go up 5%. They're currently at 22, so we'll increase it 1. Preen probe arrival phase. Alpha Centauri is landed on. And it turns out the Terrans have a fleet there. So if they roll the combat value, they have a medium fleet, the combat value is 4. If they roll a 4 or less, the probe is destroyed. It's destroyed. And that indicates the web nexus marker that would have been placed there, but since it was destroyed, we take that off. Settlement segment. First, the Perrine settlement segment. If they had a probe that landed, they would do that, but they have a few here. They'll advance the 2 to a 3, advance this 2 to a 3, and advance this 2 to a 3. Terran settlement segment, they'll advance the 1 to a 2 on Alpha Centauri. Going for our settlement segment, they have a 1 here, they'll advance to a 2. And then they have a new one here that's in the line of communication path. So they'll initiate a 1 there. And they have to pay for that since that's this initial settlement. So they'll reduce their economic points remaining by 3 to indicate they've spent those. The construction and maintenance phase. So you take your experience points remaining, because I've already updated the maintenance to where they are. So the remaining are after you've paid for your maintenance. And I have them all, everything fully maintained right now. They have 18 points. And the cost of something is 3 times their maintenance. An STB costs 12, so they'll get one of those, and they can build one wherever they have a nexus. I'll have them right here. Going far, they're down to 8 points remaining since they paid for that settlement. And everything is 3 times the cost, so they're not going to be able to build anything this time. Terrans, if they have 13, and in infantry maintenance is 4, so they're going to build an infantry, and they can either build on Sol or where they have a base, and they have Sol, so they'll build it there. The Terrans could also spend 3 to increase their web technology, or 4 for their jump, advancing that, but not this turn. And then there's no Perrine probe notation to do since they didn't build any this turn. Then we do the unit reassignment phase, or the movement phase. Not a lot of movement going this phase. I'm just going to keep the Perrine where they are until they land a probe around here. And then I'll move them around because they're already kind of up where I want them to be. The Gwynethar, they'll kind of be staying up here too because they got a settlement. But they do have a transport with a jump troop here. And they'll move to Chi Draconis. So it's a height difference of 4. So it's just a distance of 2. Look at the table, and it's for distance of 2 and 4. It's just a distance of 4. So they'll be able to make that faster than light movement to there. And then they will unload their troops. Shown there, I'll just indicate them like that. And then the Terrans aren't going to move either. And then there's nobody's declaring war on anybody yet, so there's no mobilization phase yet. Beginning turn 4. Start with the event chit phase. So drawing them. First of all, for Perrine. Settle Plus is settlement enthusiasm. Propaganda about the new life to be found in the frontier worlds leads to increased settlement. Settlement values of all systems the player is currently settling will increase by 2 points instead of normal 1 during the next settlement phase. This does not apply to systems the player begins settlement. For the Terrans, Tech Plus, which is Terran Technological Breakthrough, can only be played at Terran player. Terran player may increase either his web distance or jump range, but not both, by 1 during his next technological development phase at no cost. And then for Gwynethar, there's nothing. Economic phase, Perrine. The economic points for the Perrine are 59, since they've been settling some systems. Maintenance with their ships is 42, and their armies, etc. Difference is 17. The Gwenfar, again with their settlement including load systems. Their economic point total is 49. Their maintenance is at 38. The Terrans, they have more forces there, so their maintenance increased up to 14, and they're at 23. Now they can do they'll do their economic development phase, which goes up 5%, which is approximately goes up about 1. Then with the pre and probe arrival phase, we'll see if any are arriving. This game turn 4. A probe arrives at 36 Alpha and CD minus 34. But I'll use a Nexus because they'll become there once it lands successfully. This one lands and 32 minus 34, but on 36 Alpha, they can try to shoot it down with that fleet. So it's a light fleet, so if they get 4 or less, they're not successful, so the probe lands, and a Nexus is immediately placed there. Then the settlement phase, first the preen. So I can put for free a settlement marker on this unknown system. And then the other ones they advance by 1. The maximum here is 4. So since they're maxing to 4, they'll just take off the settlement marker and get it with a C that they're the species that inhabits that. Similarly here, the max is 3, so they've already met that, so they'll just put the C there. Max is 4 here as well. That's them. And then the Gwenfar, they advance theirs as well. The maximum settlement there is 2, so they've maxed that out. Maximum here is 2 as well, and they've already met that. So for the Terrans, they can advance from 2 to 3. Then we look at the events, and the preens have a settlement of plus, which means they can advance 1 more. Well, unfortunately, they're already maxed out in those, and they can't use it to the one that they just settled, so they actually didn't get a bonus of that. Unit construction and maintenance. So the preen have a total of 17. They'll buy a STB and put it right there. The Gwenfar are kind of limited because they only have 11. It would be a transport, which has a cost of 9, so they'll put that at a base. And the Terrans, they only have EP remaining of 10. They'll be saving their EP for buying technology. Then Terran technology development. First of all, they have the technology breakthrough, so they can advance 1 of theirs, no cost. They'll advance jump since that's more expensive. And then they can spend 3 for web development or 4 for jump. They have 10 remaining, but they can only increase each of them 1. So the Terran web distance is 4 now, and their jump is 9. And then preen probe notation. There are no probes purchased, so we won't do that. The unit reassignment or movement phase. So first to Gwenfar. Looks like there might be some stuff going on over here. They can't go that far though. The movement of their fleet is 8, and the height difference is 17. And then on top of that, you have the distance of 4 there. So they're going to go where they can go, and that's to the unexplored system Sigma Draconis, which is only 4 away and 2, so it's easily within the range. And this fleet has a range of 10. They might want to go over here, that's 9, but then on top of that, it's a distance of 3. So 9, X, Y, and 3 from the table. That actually is still within the range, so they're going to go up there. So they're secretly thinking about starting a war, getting some of their troops over that way, just webbing them over there. They're all web linked. Terrans, now their movement, their medium fleet here is a jump range of M, which is the commercial, which is the same as what their marker is here, which is 9. They're seeing if they can get to Beta Hydrae because it's got production value of 6, and it's at -11, they're at -2, so they're 9 away. It's a range of 3. So when you look at the true distance, we're still within a range of 9, so they can do that. That's what they'll do. And that's all the movement. Then mobilization phase. First of all, the Preen player gets to decide, and if he doesn't do anything to support this probe here, they will automatically destroy it. So he's going to go ahead and declare war so that he can go in there and try to get that system and defend his probe and Nexi. So the Terrans are going to stay out of it, so it's going to be the Preen versus the Gwynfor. So we'll go into the war turn segments. So initiative, Preen goes first since they declared war. And so they're going to go to 36 Ofachani by web, of course. They can bring stuff there, but they can't bring the STBs yet until they establish a beachhead. So infantry, so that's what they'll bring down there. So first of all, you do naval combat, and there isn't any because the Preen use STBs for naval combat, and they don't have any down there yet. So there's no naval combat, although Gwynfor has naval superiority. Then we go to ground combat. These are the troops we have. So the Preens are the attacker, and the defender, the Gwynfor, have naval superiority. And if the defender's naval superiority shifts at one column to the left, the ratio is 18 to 6 or 3 to 1. Go to the column here, shift to one to the left, roll the dice. 4. The defender loses 1 step. Infantry have 3 steps. You flip more once, then you go with the cadre after that. So, and then the Gwynfor go 5. So they are at a ratio of approximately 1 to 3. They have superiority, so they go 1 to the right. So it's 1 to 2. They get a 5. It's 1 to 1. So the infantry is replaced with a cadre. And then the Preens infantry is flipped over. And that's the end of that turn. In naval you go till one side is destroyed, but in land you just take your damage. And then if there was additional movement, the Terran neutral player could go. They're not going to move any other ones though, so they'll get back to the combat here. And now the Preen will go. Still approximately 3 to 1. 1. Move 1 column to the left. It's 1 to 1. Take the cadre off. You'll flip him over. Gwynfor will go. 4. They lose 2. And the Preen lose 1. So they flip over. They lost. They'll flip over this infantry. And the Gwynfor have no more units. So they've successfully won the battle. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense to play. So that's Weapon Starship from West End Games by Greg Kostakayan from 1984. It's a quite nice game. It's got good components. It's a lot of different subtleties and strategy there. The combat's pretty quick and deadly. You got technology development. You got asymmetric, races. So there's a lot of good stuff, and there's a lot of even subtleties and special units I didn't even get to. But I highly recommend if you get a copy of it. It's very enjoyable. It's very unique. I'll give that Give that a 9 out of 10. It's a good game. Thanks.